It was January 28th, 2026 at 2:47 a.m. when a dream so violent, so consuming, drove me to the cliffside garden overlooking the terraced vineyards outside of Temecula. And there, surrounded by ancient gnarled vines that twisted like arthritic fingers against the star-scattered sky, rows upon rows descending into darkness like steps into an abyss, the cold wind carrying the scent of dormant earth and something else, something like copper, like blood, like endings. Jesus appeared before me with tears streaming down his face and spoke words that shattered everything I thought I understood about the final days of January 2026. Not everyone who sees this message is meant to see it. Some will scroll past, some will ignore it. But you've been marked. You've been marked because you're here, right now, at this exact moment. That's not coincidence, that's divine appointment. Before I go any further, I need you to do something. I need you to leave your prayer requests in the comments below. I don't care how impossible your situation seems. I don't care how long you've been waiting. Leave it there. Type it out. Because what I'm about to share with you isn't just my story. It's connected to your breakthrough, to your deliverance, to everything you've been crying out for in the secret places where nobody else can hear you. And if you're serious about this, if you're truly one of the remnant who hasn't bowed the knee to comfortable, watered-down Christianity, then subscribe to this channel right now. Click that button, because I'm telling you, YouTube doesn't want you to see this content. The algorithm buries messages like this. Only true believers, only the marked ones, only those who have ears to hear will find their way here. The fact that you're watching this right now means you're supposed to be here. For those who don't know me, my name is Jonathan Roumie. I'm 51 years old, single, no children, just a man who said yes to playing Jesus in The Chosen, never knowing that decision would thrust me into spiritual encounters I never asked for, never expected, and honestly never felt worthy of. People see me on screen portraying the Son of God, and they think I have it all figured out. They think I have some direct line, some special access. But I'm just like you, broken, searching, desperate for truth in a world that's coming apart at the seams. The Chosen changed my life, yes, but not in the way people think. It didn't make me holy, it made me hungry. Hungry for the real Jesus, not the sanitized version we've created in our churches, not the motivational speaker Jesus, not the life coach Jesus, but the Jesus who overturned tables, who called religious leaders vipers, who wept over cities, who warned about the days that were coming. And he's been showing me things that terrify me, things that make me weep in the middle of the night, things about right now, about these final days of January 2026 that will leave you absolutely speechless. Let me take you back to that cliffside garden. I couldn't sleep. For 3 nights I'd been having the same dream, a dream of vineyards on fire, of fruit withering on the vine, of a harvest that never came. Each time I'd wake up gasping, drenched in sweat, with words echoing in my spirit. Come to the garden, come to the place where earth meets sky. I have something to show you. So at 2:47 a.m. on January 28th, I got in my car and drove. I didn't know exactly where I was going, just following this pull, this magnetic draw toward the hills outside the city. The roads were empty, streetlights casting orange pools on asphalt, the world asleep and unaware of what was about to be revealed to me. I found myself at this cliffside garden, a place I'd driven past 100 times but never stopped. It's one of those hidden spots that locals know about, perched on the edge of a cliff with terraced vineyards cascading down the hillside below, row after perfect row disappearing into the darkness of the valley. Someone had planted a small garden at the cliff's edge, olive trees, rosemary bushes, a stone bench worn smooth by weather and time. The temperature was 43 degrees. I remember because I checked my phone before I got out of the car, and I remember thinking I should have brought a heavier jacket. The cold bit through my thin hoodie immediately, that particular kind of California winter cold that's dry and sharp and seems to find every gap in your clothing. The wind was constant up there, coming in from the west, carrying the scent of the Pacific Ocean 30 miles away mixed with earth and dormant grapevines, and that peculiar smell of pre-dawn darkness. If darkness has a smell, and I'm telling you, it does. It smells like waiting, like anticipation, like the held breath before something breaks. I walked to the edge of the cliff, to that stone bench, and I could see the terraced vineyards below me, maybe 40 or 50 rows of them, stretching down the hillside in perfect geometric precision. Even in the darkness, I could make out their shapes, these twisted ancient vines, some of them probably 50, 60, 70 years old. In the starlight, and there were so many stars, more than I'd seen in years, the Milky Way splashed across the sky like spilled milk. The vines looked like an army of gnarled figures, frozen in postures of worship or agony. I couldn't tell which. The only sounds were the wind moving through the dry vine branches, a rattling, whispering sound, and somewhere far below, a creek or stream moving over rocks, and my own breathing, and my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I sat on that stone bench and I prayed, not eloquent prayers, just, Jesus, I'm here, you called me here, what do you want to show me? And then the temperature changed. I felt it before I saw anything, a warmth that started at the center of my chest and radiated outward, pushing back the cold. The wind didn't stop, but it changed direction, started swirling around me instead of pushing past me. And the light changed too. The starlight seemed to intensify, to focus, to concentrate on the space directly in front of me, about 10 feet away, right at the cliff's edge. And he was there. Jesus was standing there exactly where the garden met the sky, where the solid earth dropped away into nothing, silhouetted against the star-filled expanse of the valley below. But he wasn't the Jesus I'd portrayed on screen. He wasn't the Jesus of Sunday school flannel boards. He was more real than anything I'd ever seen, more solid than the stone bench beneath me, more present than my own body. And he was weeping. Tears were streaming down his face, catching the starlight, and I could hear him, not with my ears, but deeper than that, in my chest, in my bones. I could hear him weeping, and the sound of it broke something in me that I didn't know could break. Jonathan, he said, and his voice was like the wind and like the water in the creek below, and like something else, something that existed before sound was invented. Do you see them? He gestured to the vineyards below us, those rows upon rows of terraced vines descending into darkness. Yes, Lord, I whispered. My voice sounded small, insignificant against the vastness of the night. Look closer, he said. See what I see. And suddenly my vision changed. I don't know how else to describe it. It was like someone adjusted the lens of my eyes, brought everything into impossible focus, and I could see the vineyards not as they appeared, but as they truly were. The vines were dying, every single one of them. From the outside, they looked fine. Dormant, yes, as vines are in winter, but healthy, waiting for spring. But with this new sight, I could see the truth. The roots were rotting. The life was draining away. These vines that had produced fruit for decades, that had weathered storms and droughts and seasons of plenty and seasons of lack, were dying from the inside out. And then I saw something that made my blood run cold. Each vine had a face. Not literally, I'm not talking about some horror movie effect, but I could see, superimposed over each twisted trunk, the face of a believer, a Christian, someone who went to church, who sang the worship songs, who posted Bible verses on social media, who looked alive on the outside, but was dying on the inside. This is my church, Jesus said, and his voice was filled with such grief, such profound sorrow, that I started weeping too. This is my bride in the final days of January 2026. Do you see it, Jonathan? Do you see what I see? I see it, Lord, I choked out, but I don't understand. What's killing them? What's causing this? He turned to look at me then, and his eyes, I can't describe his eyes. They were filled with love and fury and grief and fire all at once. They were the eyes of someone watching his children destroy themselves, watching everything he died for being thrown away for nothing. Comfort, he said. Comfort is killing them. Convenience is killing them. The slow poison of 1,000 small compromises is killing them. The wind picked up then, stronger, colder, and I watched as it moved through the vineyard below us, shaking the branches, and I could hear it now. Not just wind, but voices. Thousands of voices, millions of voices. The voices of believers crying out, Lord, Lord. But their roots were dead. Their connection to the source was severed, and they didn't even know it. They think they have time, Jesus continued, walking along the cliff's edge now, his form moving between the olive trees of the garden, his hand trailing along the rough bark. They think January will turn into February, February into March, that life will continue as it always has. They think the warnings are for someone else, for some other generation, for some distant future that doesn't concern them. He stopped and turned back to me, and the intensity of his gaze pinned me to that stone bench. But I'm telling you, and I'm telling everyone who hears these words, the final days of January 2026 are a threshold, a point of no return, a moment when the door that has been opened begins to swing closed. Not all the way, not yet, but it's moving, Jonathan. It's moving. I felt like I couldn't breathe. The air was too thick, too heavy with the weight of what he was saying. What happens? I asked. What happens in these final days? What are you trying to warn us about? Jesus sat down beside me on the stone bench then, and I felt the warmth of his presence. And somehow that made it worse, made it more real, because this wasn't some distant deity pronouncing judgment from a throne. This was a friend, a brother, sitting beside me in a garden at 3 a.m., sharing the burden of his heart. I'm going to show you, he said quietly. Over the next 3 nights, I'm going to show you what I see when I look at my church in these final days of January 2026. I'm going to show you the truth that most pastors won't preach, that most Christians don't want to hear, that the enemy has worked overtime to keep hidden. He stood up and walked back to the cliff's edge, and as he did, the sky began to change. The stars seemed to pulse, to throb like a heartbeat, and I realized the sun would be rising soon, that I'd been there for over an hour, though it felt like minutes. The first thing you need to understand, Jesus said, his back to me, his form outlined against the slowly lightening sky, is that what's coming isn't about punishment, it's about harvest, and in every harvest there's a separation, the wheat from the tares, the sheep from the goats, the wise virgins from the foolish ones. He turned back to me one more time, and I saw that he was still weeping, but there was something else in his expression now, determination, resolve, the set jaw of someone who's made a decision and won't be swayed from it. Tell them, he said. Tell them that the comfortable Christianity they've built, the faith that costs them nothing, the belief system that requires no sacrifice, no surrender, no death to self, tell them it won't survive what's coming. Tell them that these final days of January are their warning, their wake-up call, their last chance to choose the narrow path before the wide path they're on leads them somewhere they never intended to go. The sun broke over the eastern hills then, sudden and bright, and I had to shield my eyes. When I could see again, he was gone, but the warmth remained, and the weight of his words remained, and the image of those dying vines with the faces of believers remained burned into my mind like a brand. I sat there on that stone bench as the sun rose higher, as the terraced vineyards below me emerged from darkness into light, as the world woke up and went about its business completely unaware that everything was about to change, and I knew with absolute certainty that I had to share this, that I had been marked, yes, but marked for a purpose, marked to be a messenger, marked to sound an alarm that most people won't want to hear. If you're still watching this, if you've made it this far, then you're marked too. You're marked because you're hungry for truth, because you're tired of the shallow end of the pool, because something in your spirit is crying out for the real Jesus, not the counterfeit version we've created in our own image. Tomorrow night, I'm going back to that cliffside garden. Jesus told me there's more to see, more to understand about these final days of January 2026. And I'm going to share every single detail with you, no matter how uncomfortable it makes people, no matter who it offends, no matter what it costs me, because this isn't about me. This isn't about my career or my reputation or my comfort. This is about you. This is about the church. This is about the bride making herself ready before the door closes. Leave your prayer requests below, subscribe if you haven't already, and meet me back here tomorrow night, because what Jesus showed me on the second night in that garden will shake everything you think you know about being a Christian in 2026. The clock is ticking. The final days of January are slipping away. And the question isn't whether you believe me or not. The question is whether you're willing to let Jesus show you the truth about your own vine, your own roots, your own connection to him before it's too late. I'll see you tomorrow night, same place. Deeper truth, harder words, but words that could save your life. Don't scroll past this. You were meant to see it. You were marked for this moment. I didn't sleep on January 28th. How could I, after what Jesus showed me in that cliffside garden, after seeing those dying vines with the faces of believers superimposed over them, after hearing his words about the final days of January 2026 being a threshold, a point of no return? Sleep felt like betrayal. Sleep felt like denial. I spent the day in my apartment, pacing, praying, wrestling with whether I was losing my mind or whether I'd actually encountered something so real, so urgent, that everything else in my life suddenly felt like background noise. I read through the comments you left on last night's video, hundreds of them, thousands of them, and I wept. I wept because I saw my own desperation reflected back at me. People crying out for breakthrough, for healing, for direction, for hope in a world that feels like it's spinning out of control. Some of you asked if I was okay. Some of you said you'd had similar dreams about vineyards, about harvest, about doors closing. Some of you attacked me, called me a false prophet, said I was using Jesus' name for views and attention. To those people I say this: I understand your skepticism. I do. But I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm asking you to seek Jesus yourself and let him confirm or deny what I'm sharing. Test everything. Hold fast to what is good. But for those of you who know, who sense in your spirit that something is happening right now in these final days of January 2026, something that the mainstream church isn't talking about, this message is for you. As January 28th turned into January 29th, as the sun set and darkness crept back over Southern California, I felt that same pull, that same magnetic draw toward the cliffside garden. But this time, it was stronger, more urgent, like a hand gripping my chest and pulling me forward. I arrived at 1:33 a.m. I remember the time because I looked at my phone before I got out of the car, and I remember thinking how the numbers looked like they were vibrating, pulsing with some kind of energy I couldn't explain. The temperature had dropped, 38 degrees now, cold enough that my breath came out in visible clouds, cold enough that the moisture in the air felt like it was crystallizing against my skin. But the wind had changed. The night before, the wind had been constant, coming from the west, carrying ocean scent and the smell of dormant earth. Tonight, the wind came in gusts, unpredictable, swirling, coming from every direction at once. It would die down to nothing, leaving an eerie stillness that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up, and then suddenly surge back with enough force to make the olive trees in the garden bend and creak, to make the dry branches of the grapevines below rattle like bones. The sky was different too. Last night had been clear, stars scattered like diamonds on black velvet. Tonight clouds were moving in from the north, thick and low, obscuring half the sky, creating this strange effect where part of the heavens were visible and part were hidden, like a curtain being slowly drawn across a stage. I walked to the stone bench, that same spot where Jesus had sat beside me just 24 hours earlier, and I could still feel the warmth of where he'd been, like the stone itself remembered his presence. The terraced vineyards stretched out below me, row after row descending into darkness, but tonight they looked different, more ominous, more like a graveyard than a garden. I sat down, pulled my jacket tighter around me, and I prayed. Jesus, I'm here again. You said there was more to see, more to understand. I'm ready. Show me. Please, show me. The response was immediate. The temperature spiked, not gradually but instantly, like someone had turned on a heater directly in front of me. The cold that had been biting at my exposed skin vanished, replaced by warmth that felt like summer, like standing too close to a fire, like being wrapped in something alive and breathing. And he was there again. But this time he wasn't standing at the cliff's edge. He was in the vineyard itself, down among the rows of dying vines, maybe 30 feet below where I sat. I could see him clearly despite the darkness, as if he carried his own light source, as if he was the light source, illuminating everything around him with a glow that was golden and white and somehow sad, if light can be sad. Come down, he said, and his voice carried up to me on the wind, clear as if he were standing right beside me. Come down and walk among them with me. I hesitated. The cliff face was steep, and there was no clear path down to the terraced vineyard rows. But then I saw it, a narrow trail, barely visible, winding down the hillside between the garden and the first row of vines. Had that been there yesterday? I didn't remember seeing it, but it was there now, unmistakable, and I knew I was meant to follow it. The descent took maybe 5 minutes, but it felt longer. The trail was rocky, uneven, and in the darkness I had to move carefully, testing each step before committing my weight. The wind kept gusting, sometimes pushing me forward, sometimes pulling me back, like it couldn't decide whether it wanted me to reach the bottom or not. I could hear the creek more clearly now, that sound of water moving over rocks, and I could smell the earth more intensely, that rich, loamy scent of soil that's been cultivated for generations, mixed with something else, something like decay, like rot, like death. When I reached the first terrace, Jesus was waiting for me. He was standing between 2 rows of vines, his hand resting on one of the gnarled trunks, his head bowed, his shoulders shaking slightly. He was weeping again, but differently than the night before. Last night, his tears had been grief. Tonight, his tears were anger mixed with sorrow, the tears of someone who's given everything and watched it be thrown away. Do you know what these are? He asked without looking up, his hand still on the vine trunk. I stepped closer, my feet crunching on the dry earth between the rows. Up close, the vines looked even worse than they had from above. The bark was cracked and peeling. The branches were brittle, breaking off at the slightest touch, and that smell of decay was stronger here, emanating from the vines themselves. You said they're your church, I answered quietly. Believers who look alive on the outside but are dying on the inside. Yes, he said, finally looking up at me, and his eyes were red from crying, but they were also blazing with something fierce and holy. But do you know why they're dying? Do you understand the specific poison that's killing them in these final days of January 2026? I shook my head. You said comfort, convenience, small compromises. Those are symptoms, he said, standing up straight now, releasing the vine trunk. But the root cause, the actual poison, is this. He paused, and the wind died down completely, leaving us in absolute stillness, in silence so profound I could hear my own heartbeat. They've forgotten that following me costs everything. He started walking down the row of vines, and I followed, and as we walked, the scene around us began to change. The vineyard was still there, the terraced rows still stretched out in every direction, but superimposed over it, like a double exposure in a photograph, I began to see something else. I saw churches, thousands of them, millions of them, church buildings with their lights on, parking lots full of cars, worship teams on stages, pastors behind pulpits, congregations with their hands raised in worship. And it all looked so alive, so vibrant, so successful. But then Jesus waved his hand and the image shifted, and I saw what he saw. I saw people singing worship songs while mentally planning their week, their minds a million miles away from the words coming out of their mouths. I saw pastors preaching messages carefully crafted to avoid offense, to keep the tithes coming in, to build their platforms and their brands instead of building his kingdom. I saw small groups meeting in homes, discussing Bible verses like they were discussing a book club selection, intellectualizing the Word of God while never letting it actually change them. I saw believers who called themselves Christians but whose lives were indistinguishable from the world around them. Same entertainment, same priorities, same values, same goals, same fears, same hopes, same dreams, nothing set apart, nothing holy, nothing that would make anyone look at them and wonder what made them different. This, Jesus said, stopping in the middle of the vineyard row, turning to face me with an intensity that made me want to look away, but I couldn't. This is what's killing them. They want the benefits of knowing me without the cost of following me. They want the promise of heaven without the sacrifice of earth. They want the crown without the cross. He reached out and grabbed one of the vine branches, and it snapped off in his hand, dry and dead and hollow. He held it up to me, and in the strange light that emanated from him, I could see that the inside of the branch was completely empty. No life, no sap, no connection to the root. "Do you see this?" he asked, his voice rising now, echoing off the hillside. "This is what happens when you disconnect from me. Not just intellectually. Everyone in these churches would say they're connected to me. They pray, they read their Bibles, they serve in ministries, but they're going through the motions. They're maintaining the appearance of life while the actual life drains away." He threw the dead branch down, and it shattered into dust when it hit the ground. "In these final days of January 2026, he continued, walking again, faster now, and I had to hurry to keep up. "I'm calling my church back to the ancient path, back to the narrow way, back to the kind of faith that costs something, that demands something, that transforms everything." We reached the end of the row and turned down another one, and now I could see more clearly. Each vine really did have a face, and I started recognizing some of them. Not specific people, but types. The successful businessman who tithed faithfully but built his empire on compromise. The worship leader who sang about surrender on Sunday but lived for her own glory the rest of the week. The youth pastor who was more concerned with being cool and relevant than with calling teenagers to radical discipleship. The missionary who'd gone to the field with pure motives but had slowly, imperceptibly, started serving the mission instead of serving Jesus. "I'm not talking about perfection," Jesus said, and his voice softened slightly, and I heard the ache in it, the longing. "I've never asked for perfection. I'm talking about direction. I'm talking about trajectory. I'm talking about people who are actually moving toward me instead of just maintaining a comfortable distance." He stopped at another vine, this one slightly less dead than the others, and he placed both hands on it, and I watched as light flowed from his hands into the trunk, and the vine shuddered, and green began to appear at the tips of the branches, tiny buds of new life. "This is what I want to do," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "This is what I'm desperate to do. I want to pour my life back into my people. I want to restore what's been lost. I want to revive what's been dying. But I can't do it if they won't let me. I can't do it if they're satisfied with the way things are. I can't do it if they think they're fine when they're actually dying. The wind picked up again, stronger than before, and the clouds that had been covering half the sky began to move faster, swirling, and I felt the first drops of rain, cold, sharp, stinging against my face. The second thing you need to understand about these final days of January 2026, Jesus said, raising his voice to be heard over the wind, is that I'm shaking everything that can be shaken, everything built on sand instead of rock, everything that looks impressive but has no foundation, everything that bears my name but not my nature. The rain intensified, and within seconds it was pouring, a deluge that soaked through my jacket, plastered my hair to my head, turned the dry earth between the vineyard rows into mud. But Jesus didn't move, didn't seek shelter, just stood there in the downpour with his face turned up toward the sky, and I realized he was the one sending the rain, that this wasn't just weather, this was something else, something purposeful. This rain, he said, and now he was shouting to be heard over the storm, represents what I'm pouring out right now in these final days of January. It's a rain of conviction, a rain of truth, a rain that will expose every crack in every foundation, every weakness in every structure, every compromise in every heart. Lightning flashed, illuminating the entire vineyard in stark white light, and in that flash I saw something that made my blood run cold. Some of the vines were being uprooted by the rain, the water washing away the soil around their roots, exposing how shallow they'd been planted, how weak their foundation was. And as they fell, I heard screaming, the voices of believers crying out in shock and confusion as everything they'd built their faith on collapsed around them. Why? I shouted at Jesus, my own voice barely audible over the storm. Why are you doing this? Why now? He turned to look at me, and the lightning flashed again, and in his eyes I saw something that terrified me and comforted me at the same time. I saw love, fierce, uncompromising, relentless love, the kind of love that will burn away everything false to get to what's true, the kind of love that will tear down what's broken to rebuild what's whole, the kind of love that refuses to let you stay comfortable in your dysfunction. Because I love them too much to let them continue on the path they're on, he said, and somehow I could hear him clearly now despite the storm, as if his voice was inside my head, inside my chest, inside my very bones. Because the door is closing, Jonathan, not all the way, not yet, but it's closing, and if they don't wake up now, if they don't turn around now, if they don't let me do this deep work now, then when the door finally closes, they'll find themselves on the wrong side of it. He walked toward me through the rain, and with each step he took, the storm seemed to intensify, the wind howling, the rain coming down in sheets so thick I could barely see 3 feet in front of me, but I could see him. He was clear, solid, more real than anything else in that moment. I need you to tell them, he said, standing directly in front of me now, close enough that I could see the rain mixing with the tears on his face. I need you to tell them that comfortable Christianity is over, that the age of casual discipleship is ending, that these final days of January 2026 are their warning, their wake-up call, their last chance to choose the costly path, the narrow way, the road that leads to life, even though it looks like death. He reached out and placed his hand on my chest, right over my heart, and I felt heat radiating from his palm, burning through my soaked jacket, through my shirt, through my skin, straight into my heart, and it hurt, it burned, but it was also the most alive I'd ever felt. Tell them, he said again, his face inches from mine, his eyes boring into me, that I'm not looking for people who want to add me to their lives. I'm looking for people who will let me become their life. I'm not looking for people who want to fit me into their schedule. I'm looking for people who will let me become their schedule. I'm not looking for people who want to give me a portion. I'm looking for people who will give me everything. The lightning flashed again, and thunder cracked so loud it felt like the earth itself was splitting open, and Jesus stepped back, and the rain began to slow, and the wind began to die down, and the clouds began to break apart, and through the gaps I could see stars appearing, and the eastern sky was beginning to lighten with the first hint of dawn. Tomorrow night, Jesus said, his voice quiet again now that the storm was passing. I'll show you what happens to those who refuse to hear this message. I'll show you the consequences of ignoring these warnings. I'll show you why these final days of January 2026 matter more than most people realize. He started walking back up the hillside, back toward the cliffside garden, and I followed, my clothes soaked, my body shivering from cold and adrenaline and the overwhelming weight of what I'd just experienced. When we reached the top, when we stood once again in that small garden with its olive trees and rosemary bushes and stone bench, the sun was breaking over the eastern hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. Jesus turned to face me one last time, and the morning light caught his face, and he looked both ancient and young, both fierce and gentle, both terrifying and beautiful. "Don't soften this message," he said. "Don't try to make it more palatable. Don't worry about who it offends or who it drives away. The people who are meant to hear it will hear it. The people who are marked will recognize the truth, and the people who reject it—" He paused, and profound sadness crossed his face. "The people who reject it were never really mine to begin with." And then he was gone, and I was standing alone in that garden as the sun rose, as the world woke up, as people began their day completely unaware that everything was about to change. I'm telling you right now, if you're watching this, if you've made it this far through this message, you need to take inventory of your life. You need to ask yourself the hard questions. Are you really following Jesus, or are you just maintaining a comfortable religious routine? Is your faith costing you anything? Or have you found a way to follow Jesus that requires no sacrifice, no surrender, no death to self? Because he's coming back. Not someday in the distant future. Soon. Sooner than most people think. And when he comes, he's not looking for people who knew about him. He's looking for people who knew him. He's not looking for people who did religious activities in his name. He's looking for people who actually died to themselves and let him live through them. Tomorrow night, I'm going back to that cliffside garden one final time. And what Jesus shows me on that third night will be the hardest thing I've ever had to share, but I'm going to share it anyway because you deserve to know the truth, and the truth is that time is running out. Leave your prayer requests below. Tell me honestly, does this message resonate with something you've been feeling in your spirit? Or am I just a crazy person standing in a vineyard in the rain talking to myself? I need to know I'm not alone in this. I need to know there are others who sense what I sense, who see what I see, who know that something is happening right now that the mainstream church is completely missing. Subscribe if you haven't already. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And meet me back here tomorrow night for the final installment, for the hardest truth, for the ultimate warning about these final days of January 2026. The clock is ticking, the rain is falling, the vines are dying. And the question is, will you let Jesus do the deep work necessary to restore your roots before it's too late? I'll see you tomorrow night. Final night. Final warning. Final chance. You were marked for this. Don't waste it. January 30th, 2026. The final night. The final warning. I'm not going to lie to you, I almost didn't go back. After what I experienced on the second night, after standing in that vineyard in the pouring rain while Jesus showed me the shaking that's coming, after feeling his hand burn into my chest with a heat that I can still feel 48 hours later, after seeing those vines being uprooted and hearing the screams of believers whose foundations were being exposed as sand instead of rock, I almost didn't go back, because I knew. Somehow I knew that the third night would be worse, that what he was going to show me would be the thing I didn't want to see, the truth I didn't want to face, the reality that would change everything. I spent January 29th reading your comments again. Thousands more had poured in. Some of you were angry, really angry. You called me a fear-monger, a manipulator, someone using Jesus' name to build a following. You said I was leading people astray, that I was preaching a gospel of works instead of grace, that I was putting people under condemnation instead of pointing them to freedom. To those people, I want to say this. I hear you. I understand why this message is offensive, because it offends me too. It offends everything in me that wants to believe I'm fine, that I'm doing enough, that my casual approach to following Jesus is acceptable. But the question isn't whether this message offends us. The question is whether it's true. And then there were the rest of you, the ones who said you'd been having the same dreams, the same visions, the same sense of urgency that something is happening right now in these final days of January 2026, that the church isn't talking about. You said you'd been feeling like you're dying inside while maintaining the appearance of life on the outside. You said you'd been crying out to Jesus for something real, something deeper, something that costs something, because you're tired of playing church, tired of pretending, tired of the shallow end. Those comments kept me going. Those comments reminded me that I'm not crazy, that I'm not alone, that there's a remnant out there who's hungry for truth, even when truth is uncomfortable. So on January 30th, as the sun set and darkness crept back over Southern California, I got in my car and drove back to that cliffside garden one more time. I arrived at 11:47 p.m., earlier than the previous two nights, but I couldn't wait any longer. The pull was too strong, the urgency too intense, and something told me that this final encounter wouldn't wait for the dead of night, that it would happen on the threshold between January 30th and January 31st, on the edge of the final day of the month, on the precipice of everything changing. The temperature was the coldest yet, 32 degrees exactly, right at freezing, and the moisture in the air had crystallized into frost that covered everything: the stone bench, the olive trees, the rosemary bushes, the ground itself. The whole garden sparkled in the moonlight like it had been dusted with diamonds, beautiful and deadly at the same time, because beauty at freezing temperatures can kill you if you're not careful. The sky was completely clear tonight, no clouds, no wind, just absolute stillness, and a moon so bright, so full, so impossibly large, hanging over the eastern hills that it looked artificial, like a stage prop, like something placed there deliberately for maximum dramatic effect. And the silence. The silence was profound, oppressive, the kind of silence that presses against your eardrums, that makes you aware of every sound your body makes: your breathing, your heartbeat, the rustle of your jacket as you move, the crunch of frost under your feet. I walked to the stone bench, but I didn't sit. I couldn't. The tension in the air was too thick, the anticipation too intense. I stood at the cliff's edge, looking down at the terraced vineyards below, and in the moonlight I could see them clearly, those rows upon rows of dying vines, and I could see the damage from the storm 2 nights ago. Several sections had been completely washed away, leaving gaps in the rows like missing teeth, exposed soil, and uprooted vines lying on their sides. "Jesus," I said into the silence, my voice sounding too loud, too intrusive. "I'm here. I'm ready. Show me what you need to show me." And then the moon went dark, not gradually, not like a cloud passing over it. It just went dark, like someone had flipped a switch, and the sudden absence of light was so complete, so total, that I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. The frost-covered garden that had been sparkling moments before was now invisible. The vineyard below was invisible. Everything was invisible. And in that darkness, I heard his voice. "This," Jesus said, and his voice came from everywhere and nowhere at once, surrounding me, filling the air itself, "is what it will be like for those who refuse to wake up, for those who ignore the warnings, for those who continue on the comfortable path while the door swings closed behind them." I felt his presence before I saw him, that warmth, that pressure in the atmosphere, that sense of something massive and powerful and holy moving through the darkness. And then light began to appear, but not like before, not the golden warm light that had emanated from him on the previous 2 nights. This light was white, pure white, blinding white, the kind of white that isn't the presence of color but the presence of everything, all colors at once, so intense that it hurt to look at but impossible to look away from. And he was standing in the middle of that light, at the cliff's edge, exactly where he'd stood on the first night. But he looked different now. He was still Jesus. I knew it was him, recognized him in my spirit even though his appearance had changed. But he was Jesus in his glory, Jesus in his power, Jesus as he will appear when he returns, not as the suffering servant but as the conquering king. His robe was white, whiter than the light surrounding him, whiter than anything I'd ever seen or imagined. His eyes were like flames of fire, burning, piercing, seeing everything, missing nothing. His face was like the sun shining in full strength, and his voice, when he spoke, was like the sound of many waters, like 1,000 waterfalls, like the ocean itself given voice. I fell to my knees. I couldn't help it. My legs just gave out, and I was on the frozen ground, frost soaking through my jeans, and I couldn't look at him directly anymore, could only see him in my peripheral vision because the full sight of him was too much, too intense, too overwhelming. "Jonathan," he said, and even though his voice was like thunder, there was tenderness in it, affection, the tone of someone speaking to a beloved friend. "Stand up. I need you to see this. I need you to witness this. I need you to carry this message back to my people." I struggled to my feet, using the stone bench for support, my whole body shaking from cold, from fear, from awe, from the sheer weight of being in the presence of the living God. "What you're about to see," Jesus continued, and now he was walking toward me, and with each step he took, the light intensified, and I had to shield my eyes with my hand, "is not what I want. It's not what I desire. It's not what I died to prevent. But it's what will happen if my people continue to choose comfort over consecration, convenience over commitment, the wide path over the narrow way." He stopped about 10 feet away from me, and he raised his hand, and suddenly the darkness beyond his light began to change. Images began to appear, projected onto the night itself like a movie screen, and I was seeing the future, seeing what was coming, seeing the consequences of ignoring these warnings about the final days of January 2026. The first image was of churches, thousands of them, the same churches I'd seen on the second night, with their lights on and their parking lots full and their worship teams playing and their congregations singing. But now I was seeing them from a different perspective. I was seeing them as Jesus sees them, and most of them were empty, not physically empty. The buildings were full of people, but spiritually empty. I could see it now with the same vision Jesus had given me in the vineyard, that ability to see beyond the surface to the reality underneath. These churches were full of people going through the motions, singing songs they didn't mean, praying prayers they didn't believe, listening to sermons that entertained them but didn't transform them. And then I saw Jesus walking through these churches, moving down the aisles, looking at faces, searching for something, and the grief on his face was unbearable. He was searching for faith, real faith, the kind of faith that costs something, that demands something, that changes everything, and he wasn't finding it. "Do you see?" he asked me, his voice heavy with sorrow. "Do you see what I see when I look at my church in these final days? Buildings full of people who know about me but don't know me. People who call me Lord but don't do what I say. People who want the benefits of my sacrifice without the burden of my cross." The image shifted, and now I was seeing individual believers, people in their homes, in their cars, in their workplaces, in their daily lives, and I could see the disconnect between what they professed on Sunday and how they lived the rest of the week. The businessman who sang about surrender on Sunday, but built his empire on deception and compromise Monday through Friday. The mother who raised her hands in worship, but raised her children with the same values and priorities as the godless world around her. The young man who posted Bible verses on social media, but filled his mind with pornography and his heart with bitterness. "These are the ones," Jesus said, and his voice was harder now, sharper, the voice of a judge pronouncing sentence. "Who will say to me on that day, 'Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and cast out demons in your name, and do many mighty works in your name?' And I will declare to them, 'I never knew you. Depart from me, you workers of lawlessness.'" The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd read that passage from Matthew 7 100 times, but hearing Jesus speak it, hearing the finality in his voice, the absolute certainty, the unbending judgment, it was terrifying. "But Lord," I said, my voice shaking, "these are people who did ministry in your name. They cast out demons. They did mighty works. How can you say you never knew them?" He turned to look at me, and his eyes, those eyes like flames of fire, burned into me. And I felt like every secret thing, every hidden compromise, every comfortable sin in my own life was being exposed, brought into the light, laid bare before him. "Because they did those things in my name," he said, "but not in my nature. They used my power but didn't pursue my presence. They wanted my gifts, but not my character. They wanted to be associated with me, but not transformed by me." The image shifted again, and now I was seeing something that made my stomach turn. I was seeing the moment when the door closes. Not metaphorically, actually seeing it. There was a door, massive, ancient, made of wood and iron, standing in the middle of nothing, and on one side were people pressing forward, trying to get through, and on the other side were people who'd already passed through, who were safe, who were home, and I watched as the door began to swing closed. Slowly at first, then faster, and the people on the outside began to panic, began to push and shove and cry out, "Lord, open to us!" But the door kept closing, and I could hear Jesus' voice from the other side saying, "I do not know you or where you come from. Depart from me, all you workers of evil." And the sound of that door slamming shut, I can't describe it. It was like the sound of finality itself, like the sound of opportunity ending, like the sound of mercy's limit being reached. It echoed across the darkness, and in that echo I heard the wailing of those who'd been left outside, who'd thought they had more time, who'd believed they were fine, who'd ignored every warning, every call, every invitation to go deeper, to surrender more fully, to die to themselves and live for him. I was weeping now, openly, uncontrollably, my whole body shaking with sobs. "When?" I choked out. "When does the door close? How much time do we have?" Jesus turned away from the images, and they faded back into darkness, and he walked toward me again, and the light that surrounded him softened slightly, became less blinding, and I could see his face more clearly, and he was weeping too, tears streaming down his face, catching the light, falling to the frozen ground where they sizzled and steamed. "The door doesn't close all at once," he said quietly. "It closes in stages, in seasons, in moments of decision. Every time someone hears the truth and rejects it, the door closes a little more for them. Every time someone feels the conviction of my spirit and ignores it, the door closes a little more. Every time someone chooses comfort over obedience, the door closes a little more." He knelt down in front of me, Jesus, the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, kneeling in the frost at my feet, and he took my hands in his, and his hands were warm, so warm and scarred I could feel the scars in his palms, the holes where the nails had been. "These final days of January 2026, he said, looking directly into my eyes, are a threshold moment, a tipping point, a season when I'm shaking everything that can be shaken, exposing every false foundation, calling my people back to the ancient path, back to the narrow way, back to the kind of faith that costs everything, because it's worth everything." He stood up, pulling me to my feet with him, and he led me to the cliff's edge, and we stood there together looking down at the terraced vineyards below, and as we stood there the moon came back, sudden and bright, illuminating everything, and I saw that the vineyard had changed. Some of the vines, maybe a third of them, were green. Not just green at the tips like the one he'd touched on the second night, but fully green, fully alive, with leaves unfurling, and buds appearing, and the unmistakable signs of life returning. These were the vines that had survived the storm, that had roots deep enough to withstand the shaking, that had stayed connected to the source even when everything around them was being torn apart. But the rest, the majority, were dead, completely dead. Some had been uprooted by the storm, some had simply withered where they stood. And as I watched, workers began appearing in the vineyard, moving through the rows with axes and saws, cutting down the dead vines, pulling them up, throwing them into piles to be burned. "This is the separation," Jesus said, his voice filled with grief and determination. "This is the harvest. This is what happens when the wheat is separated from the tares, when the sheep are separated from the goats, when the wise virgins are separated from the foolish ones." He pointed to the green vines, the living ones. "These are the ones who heard the warnings and responded, who felt the conviction and repented, who let me do the deep work of pruning and purifying and transforming. They look smaller now, less impressive, because I had to cut away so much dead wood, so much false growth, so much that looked like life but was actually death. But they're alive, truly alive, connected to me, abiding in me, and they will bear fruit that remains." Then he pointed to the dead vines being cut down and piled up. "And these are the ones who refused to hear, who resisted the pruning, who wanted to maintain the appearance of life without the reality of life, who thought they could follow me on their own terms, in their own way, without surrender, without sacrifice, without death to self." He turned to face me, and he placed both hands on my shoulders, and the weight of his hands felt like the weight of eternity, like the weight of every soul that would hear this message and have to decide what to do with it. "Tell them," he said, and his voice was urgent now, intense, the voice of someone running out of time to deliver a critical message. "Tell them that these final days of January 2026 are their warning. Tell them that the shaking has begun. Tell them that the door is closing. Not all the way, not yet, but it's closing. And if they don't respond now, if they don't wake up now, if they don't let me do this deep work now, then when the door finally closes, they'll find themselves on the wrong side of it." The light around him began to intensify again, growing brighter and brighter, and I had to close my eyes against it, and I felt his hands leave my shoulders, and I knew he was leaving, that this final encounter was ending, that I was being sent back with a message I didn't want to carry, but had no choice but to deliver. "One more thing," his voice came through the light, and I forced my eyes open just enough to see his silhouette against the brilliance. "Tell them that I love them. Tell them that everything I'm doing, every shaking, every pruning, every uncomfortable truth, every hard word, it's all because I love them too much to let them continue on the path they're on. Tell them that the door is still open. Tell them that there's still time. Tell them that I'm still calling, still waiting, still ready to receive anyone who will come to me with a sincere heart and a surrendered will." And then he was gone, and the light was gone, and I was standing alone at the cliff's edge in the moonlight, and the sun was beginning to rise behind me, and I could hear birds starting to sing, and the world was waking up, and everything looked normal, looked ordinary, looked like just another day. But it wasn't just another day. It was January 31st, 2026, the final day of the month, the final day of the warning, the threshold between what was and what will be. I stood there for a long time, watching the sun rise over the terraced vineyards, watching the light spread across the valley, illuminating the green vines and the dead vines, and the workers moving through the rows with their axes and saws. And I knew that what I'd seen wasn't just about some distant future. It was about right now. It was about today. It was about the choice that every person watching this video has to make. The choice between comfortable Christianity and costly discipleship, between the wide path and the narrow way, between knowing about Jesus and actually knowing Jesus, between maintaining the appearance of life and actually being alive. I'm not going to soften this message. I'm not going to make it more palatable. I'm not going to apologize for how hard it is, how uncomfortable it is, how offensive it is to our modern sensibilities. Because Jesus didn't soften it. He showed me the truth, the hard, uncomfortable, offensive truth. And he told me to tell you, and I'm going to obey him, even if it costs me everything, even if it destroys my career, even if it turns people against me, even if it makes me look like a fool or a fanatic or a false prophet. Because the door is closing. The final days of January 2026 are ending. And the question isn't whether you believe me or not. The question is whether you're willing to let Jesus show you the truth about your own vine, your own roots, your own connection to him. Are you alive or just maintaining the appearance of life? Are you connected to him or just going through religious motions? Are you on the narrow path or have you found a comfortable version of Christianity that requires no sacrifice, no surrender, no death to self? Tomorrow night, in the final part of this series, I'm going to give you practical steps. I'm going to tell you exactly what Jesus told me to tell you about how to respond to this message, how to let him do the deep work, how to ensure that you're one of the green vines and not one of the dead ones being cut down and thrown into the fire. But tonight, I just need you to sit with this. I need you to let the weight of it settle on you. I need you to stop defending yourself, stop making excuses, stop comparing yourself to others, and just be honest with Jesus about the state of your soul. Leave your prayer requests below. Tell me honestly, are you alive or just maintaining appearances? Are you connected or just going through motions? I need to know there are others out there who are willing to face the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it is. Subscribe if you haven't already. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And meet me back here tomorrow night for the final part, for the practical application, for the specific steps you need to take in these final hours before the calendar turns to February, and this window of opportunity closes. The door is still open, but it's closing. And the question is, will you walk through it while you still can? You were marked for this moment. Don't waste it. It's February 1st, 2026. The final days of January are over. The threshold has been crossed, and I'm sitting here in my apartment looking out at a world that appears unchanged, that's going about its business as if nothing happened, as if the warnings meant nothing, as if the door didn't just swing a little bit closer to closed. But something did happen, something profound, something that I'm still trying to process, still trying to understand, still trying to find the words to explain to you. This morning, at dawn, I went back to that cliffside garden one last time, not because Jesus called me there, not because I felt that magnetic pull, that urgent summons, but because I needed to see it in the daylight. I needed to see the place where everything changed, where Jesus showed me things I never wanted to see, where the comfortable version of Christianity I'd been living died, and something harder, something costlier, something more real took its place. The drive out there felt different in the daylight. The roads that had been empty and mysterious at 2 a.m. were now filled with morning commuters, people heading to work, to the gym, to coffee shops, to their normal lives. I passed churches with their signs advertising sermon series and small groups and youth events, everything looking so normal, so ordinary, so unchanged. But I had changed. Everything in me had changed. When I arrived at the garden, the sun was fully up, bright and warm despite the cold temperature, 45 degrees now, the frost from last night already melting, leaving everything damp and glistening. I parked in the same spot I'd parked 3 nights in a row, and I walked up to that stone bench, and I sat down in the exact place where Jesus had sat beside me on the first night. The terraced vineyards stretched out below me in the morning light, and I could see them clearly now, see every detail that had been hidden in darkness. And what I saw took my breath away. The vineyard was exactly as Jesus had shown me in the vision. Exactly. Some vines were green, showing signs of new life, leaves unfurling, buds appearing, but most were dead or dying, and I could see where the storm had washed away entire sections, leaving gaps in the rows, exposed soil, uprooted vines lying on their sides, and there were workers there, actual workers, a crew of maybe 6 or 7 people moving through the rows with tools, cutting down dead vines, pulling up roots, clearing away debris. I watched them for a long time, watched them work, and I realized I was seeing the physical manifestation of the spiritual reality Jesus had shown me: the separation, the harvest, the cutting away of what's dead to make room for new life. One of the workers noticed me sitting there and waved. Just a friendly wave, a acknowledgement of another human being. He had no idea that I'd been standing in that same vineyard 3 nights ago with Jesus, watching the spiritual version of the exact work he was now doing physically. He had no idea that the vines he was cutting down represented believers who'd maintained the appearance of life while dying on the inside. I waved back, and then I closed my eyes, and I prayed. Not an eloquent prayer, just, Jesus, what now? What do I do with everything you showed me? How do I help people understand? How do I call them back to the narrow path without sounding like a judgmental fanatic? How do I warn them that the door is closing without putting them under condemnation? And in the silence, in the warmth of the morning sun on my face, in the sound of the workers below and the birds singing in the olive trees behind me, I heard his voice, not audibly like the previous 3 nights, but clearly, unmistakably. The still, small voice that speaks to your spirit when you're finally quiet enough to listen. Give them the path, he said. Give them the practical steps. Give them something they can do today, right now, to begin the journey back to me. Don't just leave them with the warning. Give them the way forward. So that's what I'm going to do. That's what this final part is about. Not more visions, not more warnings, not more descriptions of dying vines and closing doors, but practical, specific, actionable steps that you can take starting today, starting right now, to ensure that you're one of the green vines, one of the ones who survives the shaking, one of the ones who's on the right side of the door when it finally closes. But before I give you those steps, I need to tell you something about myself, something I haven't shared publicly before, something that makes me vulnerable, that exposes my own struggles, that proves I'm not speaking to you from some place of spiritual superiority, but from the trenches, from the mess, from my own desperate need for Jesus to do this deep work in me. I'm 51 years old, single, no children, and for the last 5 years, since The Chosen became successful, since I became known as the guy who plays Jesus, I've been living a double life. Not in the dramatic sense, I'm not secretly living in sin or anything like that, but in the subtle sense, the dangerous sense, the sense that kills you slowly without you even realizing it. On the outside, I've been Jonathan Roumie, the actor who portrays Jesus, the guy who does interviews about faith, who posts inspirational content on social media, who speaks at Christian events, who's associated with one of the most successful faith-based projects in history. People look at me and see someone who has it all together, someone who's close to God, someone who's living the dream, but on the inside, I've been dying, slowly, imperceptibly, in ways I didn't even recognize until Jesus showed me those vines. I've been going through the motions, praying prayers I didn't really mean, reading my Bible out of obligation rather than hunger, serving in ministry because it was expected, not because it flowed from intimacy with Jesus. I've been maintaining the appearance of life while the actual life drained away. And the worst part, I didn't even know it was happening. I thought I was fine. I thought playing Jesus on screen was somehow keeping me connected to the real Jesus. I thought being surrounded by Christian community and Christian content and Christian work was the same thing as actually abiding in Him. But it's not. It's not even close. You can be immersed in Christian culture and completely disconnected from Christ. You can know everything about Jesus and not actually know Jesus. You can do ministry in His name and never hear Him say, "Well done, good and faithful servant," and that terrifies me. It should terrify all of us. So when Jesus showed me those dying vines, when He let me see the church through His eyes, when He revealed the truth about comfortable Christianity leading to a closed door, He wasn't just showing me what's wrong with the church out there. He was showing me what was wrong with me, with my own heart, with my own walk, with my own compromises and complacency and comfortable distance from the cross. These 3 nights in that cliffside garden weren't just about receiving a message to give to you. They were about Jesus doing surgery on my own soul, cutting away the dead wood, exposing the shallow roots, calling me back to the kind of faith that costs everything because it's worth everything. And I'm telling you this because I need you to understand. I'm not speaking to you as someone who has it all figured out. I'm speaking to you as someone who's in the same boat, who's facing the same choice, who's being called to the same costly discipleship that I'm calling you to. We're in this together, all of us. Every single person watching this video, every single person who's made it this far through this series, every single person who's felt that stirring in their spirit that says, this is true, this is real, this is what I've been missing. So here's what Jesus told me to tell you. Here are the practical steps. Here's the 30-minute daily challenge that will begin the process of restoration, of reconnection, of returning to the narrow path. Step 1. The honest inventory. 10 minutes. Every single day for the next 30 days, I want you to spend 10 minutes doing an honest inventory of your spiritual life. Not a surface level inventory, not a I'm basically fine inventory, but a deep, uncomfortable, brutally honest inventory. Get a journal, sit somewhere quiet, and ask yourself these specific questions. Am I maintaining the appearance of spiritual life while dying on the inside? What am I doing in Jesus' name that isn't actually flowing from intimacy with Jesus? Where have I chosen comfort over obedience in the last 24 hours? What compromises have I made that I've justified or rationalized or simply stopped noticing? If Jesus showed up in my living room right now and asked me, "Do you love me more than these?" What would these be? What are the things I'm holding on to that I'm unwilling to surrender? Write down your answers. Be specific. Be honest. Don't spiritualize it or make it sound better than it is. Just tell the truth. And here's the key. Don't try to fix everything at once. Don't make a bunch of promises to God about how you're going to change. Just acknowledge the truth. Just see it clearly. Just let the light expose what's been hidden in darkness. Because you can't repent of what you won't acknowledge. You can't turn from what you won't admit you're doing. You can't be healed of what you insist isn't broken. Step 2. The silent surrender. 10 minutes. After you've done your honest inventory, I want you to spend 10 minutes in complete silence before God. Not praying, not reading your Bible, not listening to worship music. Just silence. Sit there. Be still. Let the weight of what you just acknowledged settle on you. Let the conviction of the Holy Spirit do its work. Let Jesus show you what he wants to show you about your own vine, your own roots, your own connection to him. And in that silence, surrender, not with words. Words are too easy, too cheap, too familiar. Surrender with your will. Surrender with your heart. Surrender with that deep place inside you that's been holding back, that's been maintaining control, that's been following Jesus on your own terms instead of his. This is the hardest part. This is where most people will quit. Because silence is uncomfortable. Silence exposes. Silence reveals all the noise we use to distract ourselves from the truth about our own souls. But this is also where transformation begins, in the silence, in the surrender, in the moment when you stop talking at God and start listening to God. Step 3. The costly obedience, 10 minutes. After the silence, after the surrender, Jesus is going to show you something specific he wants you to do, not something big and dramatic, not some grand gesture, but something specific, something practical, something that will cost you something. Maybe he'll tell you to have a difficult conversation you've been avoiding. Maybe he'll tell you to give away something you've been holding on to. Maybe he'll tell you to stop a behavior you've been justifying. Maybe he'll tell you to start a discipline you've been resisting. Maybe he'll tell you to forgive someone you've been holding a grudge against. Maybe he'll tell you to confess something you've been hiding. Whatever it is, write it down. Be specific. And then, this is crucial, do it within 24 hours. Not next week. Not when you feel ready. Not when it's convenient. Within 24 hours. Because costly obedience delayed is just disobedience with better PR. Because the door is closing and we don't have time to wait until we feel like obeying. Because faith without works is dead, and if we're not willing to actually do what Jesus tells us to do, then all of this, all of these visions, all of these warnings, all of these words means nothing. This is the 30-minute daily challenge. 10 minutes of honest inventory, 10 minutes of silent surrender, 10 minutes of identifying and committing to costly obedience, 30 minutes a day. That's it. That's all I'm asking. That's all Jesus is asking. Not hours of prayer, not elaborate spiritual disciplines, not some impossible standard that only super Christians can achieve. Just 30 minutes a day of getting honest, getting quiet, and getting obedient. Do this for 30 days, from now until March 2nd, 2026, and I promise you, your life will be different. Your faith will be different. Your connection to Jesus will be different. You'll be one of the green vines. You'll be on the right side of the door. You'll be part of the remnant that survives the shaking. But here's the warning, and I need you to hear this clearly. If you don't do this, if you ignore this message, if you go back to comfortable Christianity after everything you've heard over these 4 nights, then you're choosing the wide path, you're choosing the dying vine, you're choosing to be on the wrong side of the door when it closes. I know that sounds harsh, I know that sounds like fear-mongering, I know that sounds like I'm putting you under condemnation, but it's not condemnation, it's truth. It's the same truth Jesus spoke when he said, "Enter by the narrow gate. For the gate is wide and the way is easy that leads to destruction, and those who enter by it are many. For the gate is narrow and the way is hard that leads to life, and those who find it are few." The gate is narrow, the way is hard, and those who find it are few. Not because Jesus wants to exclude people, not because he's making it difficult for the sake of being difficult, but because real faith, real discipleship, real connection to him requires something that most people aren't willing to give. It requires everything. It requires death to self. It requires surrender of control. It requires costly obedience even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's inconvenient, even when it costs you something you don't want to give up. And most people, most Christians aren't willing to pay that price. They want Jesus as Savior, but not as Lord. They want the benefits of his sacrifice, but not the burden of his cross. They want to go to heaven when they die, but they don't want to die to themselves while they're alive. And that's why the vines are dying. That's why the door is closing. That's why these final days of January 2026 mattered so much, because they were a warning, a wake-up call, a last chance to choose the narrow path before the wide path leads somewhere no one intended to go. But it's not too late. Not yet. The door is still open. There's still time. Jesus is still calling, still waiting, still ready to receive anyone who will come to him with a sincere heart and a surrendered will. So here's what I need you to do right now, today, before you close this video and go back to your normal life. Action step 1. Leave a comment below telling me honestly where you are. Are you one of the dying vines? Are you maintaining appearances while dying inside? Are you ready to do the hard work of getting honest, getting quiet, and getting obedient? I need to know there are others out there who are willing to walk this narrow path with me. Action. Step 2. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. Not because I need the numbers, not because I'm trying to build a platform, but because I'm going to continue sharing what Jesus shows me. And if you're serious about this journey, you need to stay connected to the community of people who are on the same path. Action step 3. Share this video with one person who needs to hear it. Not everyone, not your whole social media following. Just one person who you know is dying inside while maintaining appearances on the outside. One person who's on the wide path and doesn't even realize it. One person who needs to hear that the door is still open but it's closing. Action step 4. Start the 30-minute daily challenge today, right now. Don't wait until tomorrow. Don't wait until you feel ready. Get your journal. Find a quiet place. Spend 10 minutes doing an honest inventory. Spend 10 minutes in silent surrender. Spend 10 minutes identifying what Jesus is calling you to do, and then do it within 24 hours. And here's the deadline, March the 2nd, 2026, 30 days from now. If you commit to this 30-minute daily challenge for 30 days, I want you to come back to this video on March 2nd and leave a comment telling me what changed, what Jesus did, what you discovered, what died, what came alive. Because I know that if you do this, if you actually commit to getting honest and getting quiet and getting obedient for 30 days, you will not be the same person on March 2nd that you are today. The dead wood will be cut away. The shallow roots will go deep. The dying vine will come back to life. But you have to choose it. You have to commit to it. You have to actually do it. I can't do it for you. Jesus won't force you. The door is open, but you have to walk through it. The narrow path is there, but you have to choose it. The costly discipleship is available, but you have to embrace it. So what's it going to be? Are you going to scroll past this message like it was just another video, just another piece of content, just another thing to consume and forget? Or are you going to recognize that you were marked for this moment, that you were meant to see this message, that these 4 nights of encounters in a cliffside garden overlooking terraced vineyards were Jesus' way of reaching out to you, of calling you back, of giving you one more chance to choose life over death, the narrow path over the wide path, costly discipleship over comfortable Christianity? I'm sitting here in my apartment looking out at a world that appears unchanged, but I know the truth. Everything has changed. The final days of January 2026 were a threshold, and we've crossed it. The shaking has begun. The separation is happening. The door is closing. But it's not closed yet. There's still time. There's still hope. There's still an invitation being extended to anyone who will respond. Jesus is standing at the door and knocking. He's calling you by name. He's showing you the truth about your own vine, your own roots, your own connection to Him. He's offering to do the deep work, the painful work, the transformative work that will ensure you're on the right side of the door when it finally closes. All you have to do is open. All you have to do is respond. All you have to do is say yes to the narrow path, yes to costly discipleship, yes to death to self and life in Him. I went back to that cliffside garden this morning and I sat on that stone bench and I looked down at those terraced vineyards and I saw the workers cutting away the dead vines and clearing the ground for new growth. And I realized that's what Jesus is doing right now in His church, in His people, and anyone who will let Him. He's cutting away the dead wood. He's exposing the shallow roots. He's pruning everything that doesn't bear fruit. And it's painful. It's uncomfortable. It's costly. But it's also the only path to real life, to real faith, to real connection with Him. The comfortable Christianity that requires nothing, costs nothing, changes nothing. It's dying. It's being cut down. It's being thrown into the fire. But the costly discipleship that requires everything, costs everything, changes everything. It's alive. It's bearing fruit. It's on the right side of the door. Which one are you? You were marked for this moment. You were meant to see this message. You were called to this narrow path. Don't waste it. The clock is ticking. The door is closing. And the question isn't whether you believe me or not. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Start today. Start right now. 30 minutes. 30 days. March 2nd, 2026. Let's walk this narrow path together. Let's be the green vines. Let's be the ones who survive the shaking. Let's be the ones who hear Jesus say, "Well done, good and faithful servant. Enter into the joy of your master. I'll see you on the other side. You were marked. You were called. You were chosen. Now choose Him back."